This is a video to look at CSV files, getting them to spreadsheets, and how we move around. Once we have them in there, we're going to use some numbers from the electoral register. So there's a file that you can collect from the Google Drive. And before we do anything with the spreadsheets, we're just going to look at the file itself. So here it is on my desktop, electoral register.csv. So if you right click on this and open it, not with the default program, which is probably Excel or some other spreadsheet program, but with a simple text editor so that we can see, just show me what's in the file without doing any organizing or formatting of it. So there's a text edit app, or there might be a notebook app or something like this. And so we can open this and maybe blow it up a bit. And so you can see what's actually in there. And what's in there is something called constituency code, comma, parliamentary constituency, comma, register 2020, comma, register 2021, comma. And so what that will end up being is the name of the columns. And then what follows are a code, comma, a place, comma, a number, comma, a number. And so those are the four elements that will go into the first row, and then you can see that that will be the second row, that will be the third row, and so on. And so this is a very, very simple way of moving data around, and the reason it's so useful is because there's no formatting, because it's not designed for a particular program. Pretty much everybody can open it regardless of what they're using. So we go to our Google Drive and we click on New. When I say our Google Drive, I mean your Google Drive, as in your Google account. You say, so be aware of where you're working. And you go to Google Sheets and you say, give me a blank spreadsheet. And then you should get something that looks like this. Now there's several ways of getting data into a Google Sheet, but we're just going to upload it from the desktop. So we go to File, we go to Import, click on that, and then there's all sorts of places we can collect data from, but we're going to go to Upload, and then select a file from your device. So we click on our electoral register file, and it asks us if we want to detect the separate automatically. What that means is, can we assume that the commas we see in the file are what you're using to separate all the different columns of information? Because as we'll cover, or we'll have covered in the first lecture, you could use something instead of commas. But in this case, it's commas, and we can probably let it figure it out automatically. Do we want to replace the entire spreadsheet? No, it's probably just enough to insert a new sheet into what we've got. And we import our data. And there it is. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to View, Zoom, and make it 150% so you can see everything. So I can see everything as well. And the next thing we see is that as we scroll through it, we lose our headings because they're stuck at the top. Again, if you go to View, Freeze, you can select to freeze one row, and then our headers, which tell us what's in the column, we can make them bold as well. A lot of things like Command B, Command V, Command or Z, or Control Z, Control B, and so on, are the same on sheets as they are in many of your other programs. So there's our headers, frozen, one row. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this. In fact, I probably should have done that before playing with the headers, but this will do. So if you right click on this little tab down here that refers to this sheet we've just put together, you've got all sorts of options. You could delete it or rename it. So let's rename it. Let's call it data. But you can also you can duplicate it. So we're going to duplicate this so that I've got a copy, which I'm going to call original, so that we have now a copy of what we imported. So anything we do, and you can move these around, organize them as you like. It means that whatever we do here, if anything goes wrong, we have the original data over here. Now I'm going to rename this one, which you can also do by just double clicking, and I'm going to call it source, and I'm going to move that over there, and that raises the question of what is the source for this. Here it is. Okay, so here I'm going to make a note of where this came from. Okay, so for you it just came, it appeared in your data in your Google Drive, but it's actually from the ONS. So it's called Electoral Statistics for the UK if you want to look it up. So now we have the data, we have a copy of the data, and we have a link which tells us where we got the data from. So another thing we should do is give this a name. All right, I like to register numbers 2020 and 2021. Now over here we have a button called share, and this lets me adjust who has access to this. At the moment I've put in one person, which is, oh, where's he gone? Which is Gavin Allen, and I've declared him as an editor. But I can also make this available to anyone on the internet. Then I can adjust what anyone on the internet can do. So I could, in theory, let anyone on the internet edit it. But for now, we're just going to leave it as anyone on the internet can look at this. And so that's done. And if you were to come across this file, I'm now going to log in as somebody else. So if I was to be given this address and I visited the spreadsheet, it would look like this. So exactly the same, except it's marked view only. I can't do anything with the data other than look at it, because now I'm actually logged in as somebody else. But, and this is the really interesting thing, because as we'll cover, a lot of story related data gets published in this way. If I got a file, I can make my own copy. Once I make my own copy, I can then do what I want with it. So in a sense, publishing it as view only allows you, very like you would if you were to save as, you can make a fresh copy, and then you can get to work on the numbers. So we have just sorted out our sharing privileges. So anyone in the internet can view this, and one named person, which is Gavin Allen, can edit it. Now let's go back to our data. You can adjust a lot of these columns. You can also, if they all need the same width, you can select them all and adjust one, and they all follow. Now, another thing you might want to do is you might not want to work with the codes, for example, and you could right click on this column and you could say hide column. Now you can also delete the column, which, since we have a copy of this data, is a reasonable idea, but we're just going to hide it for now. So now we have 3 columns, and we can see there's a little arrow up here referring to the fact that there's a column hidden, and then if we click on the column that remains, we can unhide the column and it reappears. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to move around, and this is important because you can certainly scroll through this, but there's going to be 650 constituencies. Okay, and you think, well, okay, I'll get there eventually, as you will. There we go. However, next week you'll have 6,000 or 60,000 or whatever it is. So that's really not, it's not feasible, and it'll make your work just more tedious. So on a Mac, I imagine it's with Control on a PC, but on a Mac it's with Command, which is immediately to the left of the spacebar, and the arrows. So if you're sitting here and you, if you're sitting at the top and you hit Command with a down arrow, you will jump immediately to the bottom. And Command with a right arrow will bring you right over to the top. And up arrow brings you to the top. Now, what we've just done there to jump to the top, you can see that we're sitting in row 1, and yet what appears immediately below us is 637. And you'll come across this quite frequently. Very often, if you jump up like that, you then need to come down 1 row with an arrow, and then the thing adjusts so that you have row 2. Now, you can also do that with the Shift key, which is immediately below caps lock. Again, Command, this time with Shift and a down arrow, and you select everything. Okay, which can be extremely useful. So that's how you move around. As I said, you can, some of the things that you'll be familiar with, such as Command or Control C and Command and Control V, still hold. So there's a copy and paste. Things like Command Z, still hold. So that's useful. And the other thing you might want to do is adjust your decimal points, because often you get a data set and it'll look like this, or even worse, it'll look like this with loads of decimal points that really aren't very relevant for the numbers you're looking at. Okay, we don't have any information here, but we could well have information, but we're just not interested in 4 decimal points worth of accuracy. So these two little buttons up here, these point zeros, let us increase and decrease the decimal points. So this is something you'll find you use actually more often than you'd think. So decrease decimal points lets us turn our decimal point numbers into integers. So that's very useful. Now, the next most useful thing doesn't actually appear here, but it will very shortly, which is the automatic calculations that appear down on the bottom right. So if you select, let's select the names of some of these constituencies, right? So I've selected just by clicking and dragging, right? Click, drag, 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 drag. So you can see I've collected 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 constituencies here. Now down here, it's doing calculations, whatever calculations it thinks are feasible, well, some basic calculations with what we've selected. So it has counted them for us, right? So obviously you might think, well, that's only 5, but I might want to do what we just did, which is Command Shift down, and it will tell me that there are 650 constituencies. And since we've lost a row at the top for all the labels, we're on row 651, and we know there are 650 constituencies, so that makes sense. So what happens, however, if that's the only thing it will offer us if we give it text. Okay, so this is text, and it's counted them. There's not much else it can do. If we give it numbers, for example, we select the 5 numbers for the register in 2020, it does more with them. So it will add them up. It tells us that the sum of these 5 figures is 356,520. But it might also tell us, for example, what the average is. On average, you got about 71,000 people in these 5. It will also tell us what the minimum in there, 59,000, which is the second number, the maximum, 81,000, which is the 5th, and it will count how many things there are, okay, which again is 5. So that's extremely useful, and we'll use that in class 1. You can get very far just by selecting things and asking, how much is that? What's the average of all that? Now, another thing we can do is, which again you'll be familiar with, is Command or Control F. So Command F will let us search for things. So we might search, for example, for Cardiff. Right, and we see we've got Central Cardiff, Cardiff North, Cardiff South, and Cardiff West. There are more advanced. We can ask for Control F, but with, we don't want to replace things, but we can match the case, for example. We can ask for Cardiff with a small c, which should give us nothing. And we can match exactly, and so on. But you're most likely to just see Control F, does something exist? What have we got for Swansea, Swansea East, Swansea West? Okay, so that's Control F. You might want to find things by For example, you might be interested in any of these that had, I don't know, under 60,000 people, right? So you can go to Format. You can do a thing called conditional formatting, which says, except it's not the range C, it's the range CC. All right, let's cancel and do that again. Okay, so what we're going to do here is say turn it green if, and what's in the cell is less than, say, 60,000. Okay. And so what we've said is, in this column, which is column C, format the cells if the cell is less than 60,000. And what are we going to do? We're going to turn it green. We could say I'd like to turn it orange. Okay. Oh, that's the text. It's not right. Text should stay black, but I want the fill color, here we are, to be orange. Okay. And we'll say done. And so now what we should have is anything that's below 60,000 will be colored orange. There they are. And so we can see them. Okay. I don't know how often we use that, but it can be useful. So that's formatting. Another thing we can do, which is quite simple and very useful, is we can sort. So for example, at the moment they're sorted alphabetically, okay, by name of the constituency. But we could want to see, for example, where are the most people, right? So we might want to sort it in order of numbers of people. And there's a drop down that sits at the top of the column, and we can simply say, I can never remember if it goes Z to A or A to Z if we're going from big to small, but I think it's Z to A. It is. Okay. So now it has sorted all of these in order of size of number of people. So we can see the Isle of Wight has the most registers, most electors on the register for a constituency. Now we could jump down the bottom again with command down and see that we got 21,000 in the smallest one. Looks like it's up in Scotland. But we could also simply reverse it and say this time I want to see A to Z, and so it goes from the smallest upwards. So that's sorting, and I'm going to resort it now by A to Z, name of constituency, except it's gone. Okay. Oh, it wasn't sorted by constituency, it's sorted by code. Okay. That's how it was sorted. Okay, and then within, so it was first sorted by constituency code, and then within that, they're sorted alphabetically. If you sort them alphabetically, you see that it mixes up all the codes. So here we are, having sorted. The next thing we're going to do is go to Data and create a filter. So we put in a filter, and this will put them in each of the columns. So now we have a filter, little drop-down menu for each column. These are extremely powerful. We can do an awful lot with these. We might, for example, just want to see, let me see. All right, let's start with the code. We might just want to look for some reason at the first 5, right? Alders at Aldridge. And so the way to do that would be to click on the filter, to clear, so everything's taken off, and then to find, I've forgotten what they're called now, Aldershot and Amber Valley, say. Okay, so clear, take them all off. Let's have Aldershot, please, and Amber Valley. Okay, so we've just got those two. Now, to remove this, we can either go to Data, Remove Filter, or we can simply undo what we've done by saying Select All, everything goes back on, and you can see that the filter goes from solid green back to the regular drop-down. We might, for example, if on constituency code, we might want to filter by condition a little bit like we did with the conditional formatting earlier. And we could say, for example, show me text starts with W. Okay, now this is, you'll often run into this problem where there's too much going on. Beware these drop down menus that have expanded. If you contract them, then you can get your OK button, without which you can't do very much. So you hit OK, and we should be filtering for anything in the code column that begins with W. And so here we have all the Wales constituencies. And if we were to Command Shift down, we'll see that we get a count over here, which is what we'd expect, of 40. Okay, so one last thing, which is that you can do, now we're going to turn off these filters for now. So one last thing, which is you can do calculations. So we might want, for some reason, whoops, there we go. So we might want to see, for example, what the total is for these first three columns. Now you can do that by putting in an equal sign and then clicking on these or writing them out. So you can just click and it'll appear D2, and we want to add it, so we put in a plus sign, and then we can just click again to get D3, or we could type D3, that will work as well, plus D4. Now it loves telling us what we want to do. We won't do that now. Sometimes that can be quite useful. So now we know that the sum for these three is just over 200,000. Of course, as you've seen, if you selected those three, your automatic calculator down the bottom right will also give that to you. So we did that, and to see what's actually happening inside that column, it's enough to look on the top left, and you see that it's been built using equals D2 plus D3 plus D4. You could also say equals sum, which is what we call a formula, and then you could say I want to go from this to this, close your brackets. And so you said we want to use a sum, and we want to go from D2 to D4, and we get the same thing. Okay, and it's not often that you're going to be adding things up using plus signs, but this idea of equals sum select a range is extremely powerful, and we'll be using it for lots of different things. So there you go. That's how to get a CSV in, organize it, and do some basic manipulations, and start looking at some of the numbers.